Welcome to the New Mormon Truth, video number 15, LDS Church History, Part 2, a summary of church history between 1815 and 1846. So an overview is, this video gives an overview of LDS Church history from 1815 to 1846. I think this is a good thing to do, to have a basic knowledge before studying Saints History Volume 1 to increase retention and understanding. It's almost like pre-reading. When you read, you're supposed to like pre-read. So consider this like the pre-reading step. And most of this video is primarily taken from Our Heritage, A Brief History of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints from 1996. I'd say like 80% of materials from Our Heritage, and about 20% is from Church History in the Fullness of Times, the student manual. So, and I assert that the use of copyrighted material in this video is fair use. Basically, the maps are from like Our Heritage and Church History in the Fullness of Times and the Gospel Study Tools. So I've divided church history in this time frame. I know it says 1815, but I'm going to go back to 1796. I divide the church history in this between those 2 years in 4 basic time periods. This is just me. One I call the Vermont period from 1796 to 1816. The New York period from 1817 to 1831. The Ohio-Missouri period from 1831 to 1839. And the Nauvoo period from 1839 to 1846. Basically, this first time period in Vermont over here, this is when the Smith family lived in Vermont. They moved to New York in 1817, and from 1817 to 1831, this is the foundational time period of the church, like the coming forth of the Book of Mormon. The church was organized in 1830, so I call this the New York period, sort of the foundational. In 1831, they move. There becomes 2 centers of operations in the church, one in Kirtland, Ohio right here, which is number 5, the other one in Independence, Missouri. So there's 2 centers of church operation between these 2 periods. And then from 1839 to 1846, everyone's in Nauvoo, Illinois, which is right over here. So let's discuss each one of these time periods. So the Vermont period from 1896 to 1716, basically in 1796, Joseph Smith Sr. and Lucy Mack Smith were married in Tunbridge, Vermont. Or maybe they were married not there, but then they take up farming in Tunbridge. In 1802, they moved to Randolph, which isn't on here, which I think is about right where my cursor is, somewhere right around in there. They have a business failure, so they switched from farming to business, and they had a nice business failure. And this is the start of their being poor. So you hear about the family being poor. This is when it starts. Remember, this is just an overview. I'm just kind of highlighting the main things. I plan to go into each one of these periods in depth. So in 1805, Joseph Smith was born in Sharon, right here. And just so you know, the Smith family ends up moving around during this time period a number of times. So in 1813, Joseph Smith has his leg surgery in Lebanon, which is right here. This is very close to Dartmouth College. In 1816, they experience a crop failure when they're living in Norwich, Vermont, and this causes them to move to New York. So just a note that Saint actually starts in 1816. This is why if you see, go back and look at the previous quote that says that Saints actually covers this time period. And what I've read, I've only read a few chapters in Saints. So this whole video presentation is not based on a summary of Saints. It's really based on Our Heritage. Saints starts in 1816, and what I've read so far in Saints, which is literally like 3 or 4 chapters, it reflects back to Smith's leg surgery in 1813. So, like I said, the Smith family moves to New York in January 1817. Actually, Smith Sr. heads out to Palmyra earlier, works, and then sends for the family. And this is a 250-mile journey, which took the family a month to do. I think this is the approximate route. We know that, so here's Norwich and here's Palmyra, so I think they went like this. We know that they traveled a trail or route that went through here. They don't really say how they got from Norwich to this known route, but in a book that I read, it listed that they were in one city over here, and then they were in a city over here. So I assume they probably went over this way and came down. So this little part is an interpolation by me, and I think most sources will tell you that they followed this route here. But this is their, I'm going to call it the basic route that they took. So the New York period, so once again, they moved up Palmyra in 1817. Remember January 1817? So this is the general area where the church history will take place. So here's Fayette, here's Colesville, here's Harmony, here's South Bainbridge. So it's good to have a map reference. This, Palmyra is in the Finger Lakes area. These are the Finger Lakes near Lake Ontario. So in 1819 or 20, they moved to Manchester, just a few miles south of Palmyra. Spring 1820 is the first vision. So that means Joseph Smith Jr. had the first vision in Manchester in 1820. 1823, this is when Moroni appears to Joseph Smith and tells him about the gold plates, etc. So that's September 1823. He's living in Manchester. 1827, Joseph Smith retrieves the plates. And then in December 1827, they move to Harmony, Pennsylvania. Here's Harmony, Pennsylvania. They actually are on the north side of the river here. This is the Susquehanna River. They're actually on the north side. But they move from Manchester to Harmony because between September and December, Smith is not able, or Joseph isn't able to translate the plates because people are trying to get the plates. So he moves to Harmony to do that. Now, why Harmony? Well, this is actually where Emma Smith is, or Emma Hale is from Harmony. So he met Emma when he was working in Harmony. So he moves to basically sort of in with his father-in-law. In February 1828, while Joseph is in Harmony, this is when Martin Harris visits. He comes from, Martin Harris is from Palmyra. He comes and gets characters off his characters document and goes to Professor Charles Anton, and goes to New York, and then returns. That was in February 1828. Then thereafter, in the spring of 1828, Martin Harris acts as a scribe, translating a portion of the Book of Mormon known as the Book of Lehi. And then, Martin takes the manuscript, the 116 pages, back with him to Palmyra, and they're lost. Many believe that his wife, Lucy Harris, actually burned them, but no one really knows. They're lost. So these pages are lost. And then maybe to say, just to back up one, because of this, the angel Moroni comes and takes the plates away, and then September of 1828, the plates are returned to Joseph Smith for translation. So continuing in this time period, in April 1829, this is when Cowdery comes. He's staying with the Smiths in Manchester. He's a school teacher, learns of the plates, and comes to Harmony to act as scribe for Joseph in April 1829. In May 1829, the priesthood is restored. We actually have the date of the Aaronic priesthood, but I believe we do not have the exact date of the Melchizedek priesthood restoration, but I think most believe it had occurred in May 1829. In June 1829, they moved to Fayette. So basically, due to persecutions here in Harmony, they're forced to move to Fayette to finish the translation of the Book of Mormon. Now, why Fayette? This is where David Whitmer lives. So it's actually Oliver Cowdery who knew David Whitmer. So basically, Joseph and Oliver are down here translating are having problems. Cowdery writes to Whitmer, and Whitmer comes and gets them, and or they move to Fayette and complete the translation in Fayette, New York. So the three witness. So if you're wondering where the three witness vision occurs in Fayette, and then shortly thereafter, actually, they travel to Manchester, and the eight witness account or testimony, or where does that actually occur? That actually occurs in Manchester shortly after the three witness. But the three witness vision occurs in Fayette. The eight witness event occurs in Manchester. Thereafter, in August 1829, Joseph Smith gets a printer for the Book of Mormon, and the Book of Mormon begins printing in August 1829. In March, I think after the translation is finished, that Joseph returns to Harmony, because this is where Emma is. So I believe Joseph at this time, I guess his main residence is in Harmony, but he's traveling to Fayette and Manchester. So in April 1830, the Book of Mormon goes on sale. In April 1830, the church is organized. And then October 1830, I call this the Lamanite mission, meaning Oliver Cowdery and three others were called on a mission to go to the Lamanites, basically Missouri. That's in October 1830. And then December 1830, due to persecution in the area, there's 200 saints in this area. If you don't know, there's basically three branches at this time. There's Colesville, Fayette, and Manchester. The total membership of the church is about 200 at this time, and the Lord commands them to go to Ohio. Why Ohio? Is because when Oliver Cowdery and the three other, I forget who they were called on the Lamanite mission, they actually pass through Kirtland, and they convert Sidney Rigdon, and they have about 100 converts there. So it's a logical place to go, because there's a lot of converts in Ohio. So their command, the Lord tells them to go to Ohio. So the Ohio-Missouri period, 1831 to 1839. So here's Kirtland, Ohio, and here's Missouri. So basically, like I said, the saints are commanded December 1830 to go to Ohio. So, over the next, after December, the saints start coming to Ohio. So in February 1831, Joseph arrives in Ohio, right here. And then in May, so you can see how many months later, in May 1831, the New York saints arrive in Ohio. So in December, they're told to go. In December 1830, they're told to go there, and by Mayish, you can call it springtime, they arrive in Ohio. And then June 1831, this is the next month, the Lord commands, or I think it's the Lord, Joseph, some elders, and the Colville saints to go to Missouri. The reason the Colville saints have to go to Missouri is once the saints arrive in Ohio, there wasn't room, or they didn't have land. They have to settle somewhere. And I believe one of the people that promised that the saints could settle at land, when it comes down to the time, says, oh, sorry, you can't come on my land. So I think it leaves the Colville Saints sort of stuck. So they go to Missouri with Joseph and these elders. So why Missouri? I mean, we can understand Ohio because there's a bunch of converts here from the Sidney Rigdon. Sidney Rigdon was a preacher, had a congregations, and most or over 100 of them are converted. But why Missouri? Should be the question, or maybe if you're wondering why Missouri. Just a note on this, this was the western edge of the United States back then, and to the west of this was Indian Territory. Okay, that'll come up in the next quote. So why Missouri? Well, from Teachings in the Fullness of Times, it says Revelation said that Zion would be on the borders by the Lamanites. So that's that revelation was received in 1830. It's Doctrine and Covenants 28:9, and would be located in Missouri. So that's that revelation was in June 1831. But where? Missouri's western border was approximately 300 miles long. So now you see why Joseph and these elders go to Missouri. They're trying to find the place of Zion. And then this quote, also again from the Church History in the Fullness of Times, quote, this land, which is, and this is quoting Doctrine and Covenants, should be probably a double quote. This land, which is the land of Missouri, is the land which I, meaning the Lord, have appointed and consecrated for the gathering of the saints. Behold, the place which is now called Independence, Missouri, is a center place, and a spot for the temple is lying westward upon a lot which is not far from the courthouse. So that's Doctrine and Covenants. That was in July 1831. So Smith and the elders, and I also believe the Colville Saints have arrived then. Joseph Smith and the gathering saints were elated that at last the exact location of the promised city of Zion was revealed to them. So basically, God reveals that it was, you can see previously, the Lord had revealed it would be in Missouri. So this is why people are going to Missouri. They find the location. Its Independence is Zion, and people are to gather there. So that's the reason people are going to Missouri. In July and August, the Zion is identified. You can see that's just right here. In August, the temple site is dedicated in Independence, Missouri. So if you want to know where the first temple was to be located, it was not Kirtland. The Lord first revealed a temple to be built in Independence, Missouri. And Joseph returns to Kirtland. Whoops. So, in the summer of 1832, 300 to 400 saints arrive in Missouri. In December 1832, a revelation is given to build the Kirtland Temple in Ohio. So we already had a revelation about building a temple in Missouri. Now one is received to build a temple in Kirtland, Ohio. And by July 1833, the saints in Missouri number about 1,200. And in the summer, you say, oh, this isn't this the summer? Well, in the summer of 1833, basically the Missouri residents demand that the saints leave. So then also in 1833, I'm not too sure of the exact month, but the Book of Commandments, which is would become the Doctrine and Covenants, was published in Missouri. And there isn't too many of these because during the persecution, as we'll see, they aren't able to publish many of these books. So the Missouri persecution, 1833. So according to our heritage, before April 1833, had ended, the spirit of persecution manifested itself. At an early stage, local Missouri residents warned church members that they were displeased with the arrival of so many LDS saints, as we just saw, 1,200 by the summer 1833, who, they feared, would soon overwhelm them at the voting polls. The saints were primarily from northern states and generally were against black slavery, which was then legal in the state of Missouri. The saints' belief in the Book of Mormon as scripture, and that their claim that Jackson County was ultimately to be their Zion, and their assertion that they were led by a prophet, were very unsettling to the Missourians. Two, the charge that they had contact with the Indians aroused the suspicions of local residents. So basically, you can see the Missourians saw all these saints arriving, and they're probably going to take over, and they were abolitionists, if you can say that, against black slavery, and their religious beliefs were definitely different, and the claim that Jackson County was their central point. Very unsettling to them. So it all came to a head on July 20th, 1833. A mob destroys the printing press in Independence, so the church-owned printing press. This is one of the reasons why we don't have so many copies of the Book of Commandments. And basically, thereafter, confrontations and saint property destruction led to a battle near Big Blue River, where 3 mob members and 1 saint they were killed. Basically, the state militia is called in and disarms. I believe they're asked to disarm both parties, but they end up disarming the saints, giving the weapons to the mob, and the mob attacks the saints, and the saints flee. So not very nice. In late 1833, the Missouri Saints go to Clay County, Missouri. This is why I have the arrow. So they're here in Independence, or this general area, and due to the mobs, they cross the Missouri River into Clay County, Missouri. So remember, that was 1833. In February 1834, a commandment is received by Joseph Smith to organize a group of, I insert the editorial comment, armed men to march from Kirtland to Missouri to help restore the saints to their lands. So they're in Clay County, remember? So this will be the path. So, and then in May through July 1834, it's called Zion's Camp. So anytime you hear Zion's Camp was 207 men, 11 women, 11 children. They march over 1,000 miles in 45 days. So they march along this route here from Ohio to Missouri to restore Zion, or saints, to their lands. So Zion's Camp, then 300 armed Missourians came out to meet Zion's Camp in late June 1844. The Missourians, attack with cannons, but their attack is stopped by a sudden rainstorm. And then from Our Heritage, the Lord instructed Zion's Camp that Zion's Camp should not pursue its military objective. This is why I used the term armed. In consequence of the transgressions of my people, it is expedience in me that mine elders should wait for a little season for the redemption of Zion. So we're talking redemption of Zion is referring to restoring the saints to Independence, Missouri, because that's where Zion was revealed to be. And also from Our Heritage, for some in the camp, the failure of this military objective, once again that's why I used armed, was the final test of their faith. So there are people in Zion's Camp who just said, I've had enough, and left. But continuing the Missouri period, the next February, so that was 1844. It's almost like the 1833 is the persecutions in Missouri. 1834 is like the Zion's Camp. In 1835, the Quorum of the 12 and the 70 are organized. 79 of 82 of these men came from Zion's Camp. In July 1835, this is when the Egyptian papyrus or papyri are purchased in Ohio. This would, you know, it's, there's basically like, I think, two scrolls. I'll get into this. One was the writings of Abraham, the other one the writings of Joseph. This is where Joseph Smith does a translation of the papyrus or the papyri, which ends up being the Book of Abraham. Well, this comes, these are purchased in July 1835. So this is the beginning of the Book of Abraham. Remember, we're talking about the critical issues before. Well, this is where this one, we can dive deeper into that one. But July 1835, this is when he purchases the Egyptian papyrus. In August 1835, this is when the first edition of Doctrine and Covenants is published in Ohio. So remember, before 1833 was the Book of Commandments, additional revelations, whatever you want to call it. We can dive deeper, but this is the first edition of the Doctrine and Covenants is published in August 1835 in Ohio. Oops, wrong way. Continuing in March 1836, remember they got a command before to build a temple in Kirtland. Well, in March 1836, the Kirtland Temple is dedicated. And then April 1836, this is when we read about the appearances in the Kirtland Temple. This is when the Lord, Moses, Elijah, and Elijah appeared to Joseph Smith on the Oliver Cowder and restore the keys. That's April 1836. And then in the summer of 1836, the Missouri Saints relocate to Farless, Missouri. Remember, they had been pushed from independence in the Clay County. Now in the summer of 1836, the Saints in Clay County moved to Far West, Missouri. Why do they do this? Well, basically, the Missouri Saints in Clay County, the Missouri Saints in Clay County tried to go back to Jackson County, but could not. The Clay County residents, meaning the non-Mormons, residents became concerned as more saints arrived. They reminded the saints of their promise to leave. And then from Church History in the Fullness of Times, following their expulsion from Jackson County in late 1833, the Missouri Saints lived in relative peace with the original inhabitants of Clay County, but the leaders of the church never intended that this arrangement be permanent. They consistently petitioned government authorities for assistance to re-enter Jackson County and regain their property, but all their attempts proved futile. Meanwhile, Latter-day Saints continued to arrive, forcing the fear among Clay County residents that the Mormon settlements would become permanent. The Clay County residents' objections included, and these are very similar to the Jackson County. I'd go back and read that. They said that the Saints, report, this is a quote from Church History and Fullness of Times, that the Saints were poor, their religious differences stirred up prejudice, their Eastern customs and dialect were alien to the Missourians, they opposed slavery, they believed that the Indians were God's chosen people destined to inherit the land of Missouri with them. Remember, previously, the independents said they had contact with the Indians. The citizens also reminded the Mormons of their pledge to leave the county, and Clay County leaders promised to control any violence towards the Mormons until they could leave the area. So with all this, the Saints relocate to Far West. So continuing, 1837, because that was 1836 that they relocate, so 1837, the second edition of the Book of Mormon is published in 1837 in Ohio. In 1837, probably the main event is the Kirtland Bank failure and apostasy. So, and then January 1838, I'm going to get a little bit more of this on the next slide. Due to this apostasy, Joseph is forced to flee to Far West, Missouri in January 1838, where the Saints had, the Missouri Saints were currently. And then in 1838, the other Saints in Ohio are forced to relocate to Far West, Missouri. So what's this Kirtland Bank apostasy? So the Kirtland Bank failures is according to, it's more to this quote. It's multiple. Let's read the whole thing. It's from Our Heritage. The United States was suffering a financial depression. The church felt the effects. Some members became caught up in rampant speculation and debt and did not spiritually survive a dark time of economic collapse, including the collapse of the Kirtland Safety Society. This banking institution, the Kirtland Banking Safety Society, had been established by church members in Kirtland, and some members incorrectly blamed Joseph Smith for the problems associated with it. Organized persecution and mob violence and mob action came from residents of the local community and from bitter members who had been excommunicated or who had apostatized from the church. As the violence against the saints and their leaders escalated, it became unsafe for them to remain in Kirtland. The prophet, whose life was in grave danger, fled Kirtland in January 1838 for Far West Missouri. During 1838, most of the faithful saints were forced to leave. So that's a summary of what happened in Kirtland and why they left Kirtland. So basically there was a economic collapse and then persecution, and then the saints fled Ohio for Missouri. In July 1838, Far West Temple, so we have, their saints are in Far West now. There's a revelation to build a temple, and they lay the cornerstone in July 1838. And then once again, the saints are going to have problems with their Missourian residents. Violence at the polls in Gallatin, Missouri. So there's violence at the polls. So here's Gallatin. The state militia has to come in to keep the peace. But then it all comes to a head in October 1838. Fierce in October 1838, so just a few months after the August violence. A fierce battle at Crooked Creek, LDS militia versus state militia. You're all like, wow, why is that? And in October 1838, Governor Boggs issues the extermination order, which most Mormons are familiar with. And then 1838 is the Haun's Mill Massacre. There's Haun's Mill, where 17 Mormons are killed and 15 are injured. So why the October 1838 violence, which starts really with this October 1838 battle? According to Our Heritage, Captain Samuel W. Bogart, one of the state militia officers, was relatively closely allied with the mob. He decided to begin a conflict by kidnapping 3 LDS saints and holding them in his camp on the Crooked River in northwestern Ray County. A company of LDS Saints militia was dispatched to rescue these men. Continuing in Our Heritage, Captain Samuel Bogart's company had acted more like a mob than a state militia. Nevertheless, the death of a militiaman in the battle of Crooked Creek, along with other reports, was employed by Governor Lilburn W. Boggs in formulating his infamous extermination order. The decree, dated 27th October 1838, stated in part, "The Mormons must be treated as enemies and must be exterminated or driven from the state if necessary for the public peace. Their outrages are beyond all description." So, we were just talking about October 1838 when all this violence is going on. And November 1838, it might have been November 1st, Joseph was arrested in Far West, and along with other members or other leaders of the church, found guilty and set for execution. But in December 1838, Joseph is sent to Liberty Jail in Liberty. This is where we have the famous, we talk about him being in Liberty Jail. This is the time period. He's sent to Liberty Jail in 1838, and he's here. Remember, the saints are in Far West. He's sent to the Liberty Jail. So another map. Remember, there's an extermination order, so the Saints get the heck out of Missouri. So what do? Remember, that was October 1838. So in February 1839, over 8,000 Saints moved from far west. Who's far west? They go to, I don't know what route they took, but they went to Quincy, Illinois. In April 1839, Joseph is allowed to escape and goes to Quincy. So he's down here in Liberty. He's allowed to escape, and he goes to Quincy. And then May 1839, I think they're buying land over here by Nauvoo, which is actually Commerce. Joseph moves to Commerce, Illinois. So the Saints then are purchasing property up here by Commerce, which would later become known as Nauvoo. They move there in basically like the summer of 1839. So this will end the Ohio-Missouri period, because all the Saints are going to relocate to Nauvoo. So there you go, summer 1839, Saints relocate to Nauvoo. So the Nauvoo period, the last period here, in December 1839, remember the summer 1839 is when they all moved there, the Nauvoo City Charter is granted, and John C. Bennett is elected as the first mayor in 1841. He'll become a key player as we go through this. That's why I mention him. And just a note, rapid growth. Nauvoo becomes the largest city in Illinois within 4 years. Getting back to the timeline, in 1840, the third edition of the Book of Mormon is published. I believe Joseph Smith went through, the 1837, he went through and did a grammatical cleanup, and I think 1840, Joseph Smith compared the printer's manuscript with the original manuscript and made some corrections. August 1840, Joseph preaches for the first time about baptism for the dead. In January 1841, there's a command to build a temple in Nauvoo, and in April, the cornerstone is laid. So once again, another temple. And in November 1841, the basement of the temple is completed and dedicated, and baptisms for the dead begin in the basement of the unfinished temple. In March 1842, the Book of Abraham appears in the newspaper. So the Saints have a newspaper called the Times and Season. And I believe the Book of Abraham is printed it's in a series of articles. I forget how many, but that starts in March 1842. So remember, he got the scrolls in 1835 and did some partial, at least some translation in 1835, but he finishes the translation and publishes it in 1842. And also in March 1842, the Wreath Society is founded. In April 1842, Joseph Smith history first appears in the newspaper. This was a serial article that would continue for years, where it's his history, and the first portion of this is actually in the Pearl of Great Price now. In May 1842, the first endowment is given in the red brick store, not in the temple. The endowment is given just to the church leaders in May 1842. It's not revealed to the general church membership. And it's not even given in the temple. It's given in the red brick stores where Joseph Smith has his office. In May and July 1843, the revelations on eternal marriage are received. So that's Doctrine and Covenants 131 and 132. In January 1844, Joseph becomes candidate for U.S. president. In April 1944, Joseph Smith gives the King Fault Discourse, which contains information or statements about the nature of God, exaltation, and eternal progression, etc. Very key. This discourse is quoted or referred to a lot. That was actually April 1844. And now the persecution. You can sort of see all this persecution as we go through. This is a quote from Our Heritage, since 1841, citizens groups, apostates, and civil leaders conspired to destroy the church by destroying its prophet. So, in early June 1844, the Nauvoo Expositor Press destroyed by order of the Nauvoo City Council. Joseph was mayor since May 1842. Basically, the Nauvoo Expositor was published by some people that had left the church. One of them was William Law. He was very close to Joseph Smith. He publishes some information. The city council says this is, not wasn't good, and they just ordered the press destroyed. And just to note that Joseph Smith was the mayor, so he's on the city council, and they destroy the press. Well, just so you know, destroying the press is not something that's very cool. So this is serious repercussions. So the Illinois Governor Thomas Ford insisted that the Nauvoo City Council members, including Joseph Smith, stand trial for causing a civil disturbance. So we always hear about Joseph Smith's martyrdom. Well, believe it or not, the thing that directly caused the martyrdom was the destruction of the Nauvoo Expositor Press. Most people just sort of say, oh, he was arrested. Well, why was he arrested? This is the reason Joseph Smith was arrested. So late June 1844, so that's early June 1844, the press is destroyed. They want to bring him to trial. They arrest Joseph Smith in late June 1844. He goes to Carthage and is murdered. In August 1844 is what's called the succession crisis. Basically, Joseph Smith and Hiram are both murdered. Who's the leader of the church? Well, the two that are pointed out in our heritage, first one was Sidney Rigdon. He was actually first counsel in the first presidency. The other one was Brigham Young. He was president of the Quorum of 12 Apostles. Our heritage goes on to describe the Rigdon got up and spoke and talked about being the guardian of the church, and then Brigham Young got up and spoke, and then people say that Brigham Young spoke with the voice of Joseph, and people took this as a sign that Brigham Young was the leader of the church, or the Quorum of the 12 Apostles was the leader of the church. So the succession crisis ended with that. And then December 1845, the temple attic is dedicated, and the temple ceremony is introduced to the general church membership. Basically, the church endowment had been going on for 3 years, or maybe it was after 3 years, it was given to the general membership. And they started doing a bunch of temple work, a bunch of endowments, until the saints leave Nauvoo in February 1846. And then in May 1846, after the saints leave, the temple wasn't even finished, it's dedicated. No one's really even there. And just a note about the temple, there was an arsonist who destroyed, I'm going to call it destroyed, or arsonist set fire to the temple in October 1848. And then most of the temple was destroyed by a tornado in May 1850. I believe the rest of it was pulled or knocked down, because I think this destroyed like 3 of the 4 walls or something, and the final wall was actually demolished on purpose. I think it was 1858. It could have been like 1860. So if you liked the video, please hit like, and please subscribe. And here are my sources.